Adesso chiudi gli occhi e immagina un futuro senza fame, senza guerre, senza povertà, un futuro senza discriminazioni, dove il clima non cambia, dove essere donna non fa paura. È il momento di aprire gli occhi. Impegnandoci tutti raggiungeremo ogni obiettivo. Se possiamo immaginarlo, possiamo farlo. Uno sviluppo sostenibile è possibile. Vieni a vederlo con i tuoi occhi. Festival dello Sviluppo Sostenibile. Guardiamo al futuro.
Afternoon and welcome to the 8th edition of the Sustainable Development Festival. The video shared the objectives, and Enrico Giovannini, who's about to take the floor in a moment, said, "This is an emotional video," and I fully agree with him. Before giving the floor to our host, the chair of the association, let me thank the Ministry for Foreign Affairs for contributing to the cooperation of this the organization of this festival. And RAI is also sponsoring the event. Let me remind you the words stated by the Italian President of the Republic yesterday, and he stated that cooperation is key to trigger fair, sustainable, and inclusive economic development. So, in just a few words, he perfectly summarized more than one goal. I kindly invite our host to reach us on stage, Marco De Logu, head of Pala Expo. It's such a pleasure for us to be here. Do you want me to stand? It's up to you. Thank you very much. I will be relatively brief. Everything you can read on screen is what we do on a personal basis and as a business. And I know that the Vice President Ivana Portella fully agrees with me. And these words are part of our everyday activities. I was talking to President Giovannini a moment ago. We have known each other for quite some time. And I told him it is our task to combat social inequalities through culture, art, and our activities. Everything has to be done in a perfectly sustainable way. And the history of this city is a source of inspiration, which also guides our activities. The activities we perform are not always perfectly motivated. Well, as you may know, Rome, for a variety of reasons, has a unique network of academias. I worked in London for quite some time, and I have to say that our network of academias is much richer than their network. And this is something that other colleagues may also confirm. We have such a range of exhibitions and activities that we organize that are unequaled all over the world. Let me close by saying that it's moving for me to read these messages. They are emotional messages that we want to share with future generations. I very much look forward to the activities we'll be carrying out together. Stay with us and keep supporting ASVIS, the Association for Sustainable Development. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for reminding us that culture is an integral part of sustainable development. I would like to invite on stage Enrico Giovannini. Thank you very much. The video showed it very clearly. It's a very simple video, but it clearly shows the objectives, the goals. Now, as for the 2030 agenda, we still have 6 years to go through, but we have not even reached the 40 or 50%. Could you please elaborate on that? Thank you and good afternoon. And greetings to those who are following us via streaming. We're not there yet. During the September UN summit, the Secretary General of the United Nations quoted the slogan of the Agenda 2030, and he said, nobody should be left behind. As a matter of fact, we run the risk of leaving the whole agenda behind. Think about the international frictions, think about the risks we run. Our concerns are growing bigger. This is a reality. And the problems around us could become mass destruction weapons. They're now talking about a common budget, not to speed up the energy or environmental transition, but rather to organize a common defense system. Of course, I'm not underestimating the risks we'll run. Now, from this point of view, let me mention President Mattarella's statement yesterday at the United Nations. His message deserves great attention. He talked about the 2030 agenda and stated that this is not a bureaucratic procedure nor a message for dreamers. And the 18th goal, that is partnership, which is not just cooperation to development, but full cooperation. And I'm very grateful to President Delogu for hosting the festival for 4 years now. And I'm very grateful to him for supporting our message. The partnership described in the goal is at risk. The spring report we published yesterday on the occasion of the opening of our festival in Ivrea, Scenarios for Italy from 2030 to 2050. Well, the first chapter of this report contains an in-depth analysis of what Italy is doing in a variety of domains affecting the agenda, the 2030 agenda, including the topic of international cooperation and also including the topic of foreign policies. It should be stated very clearly, we're not there yet. Italy committed, just like the other industrialized countries, to reaching 0.75% of the GDP for aids to development. A couple of years ago, we reached 0.33%. And for those of you who are not familiar with these numbers, because of increased expenditures for immigrants, which means that net aids to developing countries were already decreasing. So for this reason, according to the OECD data, we're now down to 0.27%. And this is, of course, not sufficient. And as a matter of fact, many funds have been allocated to migrants who are already living in Italy. The decision to not focus on international cooperation is a short-sighted one, especially for a country like Italy, and especially for a region like the European Union that is so close to Africa, the continent that is expected to grow more and more, and also the continent that is going through significant demographic increase. And this is why Africa pays special attention to sustainable development. The so-called Mattei Plan is still being defined. Many elements are still missing from the plan. However, the Mattei Plan has been funded, taking the needs of Africa into consideration. So no extra money was allocated. Funds for climate and cooperation were used instead. So should the European Union decide to take the geopolitical issues into account, should they do that seriously? And should the European Union focus on sustainable development of Africa, we would prevent the mistake that the OECD described in our report devoted to medium-term outlooks. It may be difficult to understand. You may have heard of the story of the alien coming to Earth and saying, the industrialized countries have caused climate issues because of their CO2 emissions. And this has an impact on the poorest countries, which cannot be blamed for that. So the alien checks the data and finds out that the higher cost for transitioning to renewable energy will be paid by the emerging countries and the developing countries. Why is that? Because the Western countries sold a myth to those countries which they can no longer follow. They sold obsolete technology to these countries rather than contributing to their growth and development, rather than making new technologies available. So, according to the OECD, the highest price will be paid by the developing countries because they will be forced to get rid of investments, equipment, which were completely wrong. And if they don't want to get rid of the equipment and plants, we will not be able to reach the decarbonization goals, and the cost will have to be paid by the industrialized countries and the developing countries. In the report we published yesterday, simulations were also made. These simulations were developed together with Oxford Economics. The simulations describe a potential scenario for the period between 2030 and 2050. And there is a twofold message that applies to cooperation policies and much more. If we rule out the assumption whereby the world GDP drops to zero in 75 years from now, it drops to zero? Yes, because of a 5-degree temperature increase, the economy, the world, the way we know it today will no longer exist. So in 75 years from now, the GDP will drop to zero. Of course, it will not happen overnight. And in such a catastrophic scenario, in 2050, Italy will lose 30% of its GDP. Not to mention the damage caused by acts of God and extreme weather conditions. There is another scenario which we like much more, that is to say, transition to a decarbonized economy for Italy and the rest of the world. In such a case, the temperature increase would be acceptable. There would still be an impact on the GDP or the employment rate. And this is due to the fact that carbon taxes will have to be applied. Inflation will increase, revenues will go down. So in the next 10 to 20 years, the impact might be even worse. One might be tempted to postpone to 2030 and keep tins here. So we would abdicate our responsibilities. Of course, this would generate a cost increase. And those who say, let's slow down, they're trying to pass over the problem to the future generations. And there's one final option, that is to say, considering the energy transition as a great opportunity for changing our economic and social systems. In such a case, powerful private and public investments would trigger a virtuous process that increases the GDP, the rate of employment, and it will also allow us to significantly reduce borrowing and GDP ratio. We'll also be able to reach the climate targets and prevent not just the risk of a catastrophic scenario, but we would rather trigger a new growth cycle that would counterbalance the trends of a century-old stagnation. not just for the industrialized countries, but also for the emerging countries. So this fourfold option, it's not a twofold option, implies that we shoulder responsibility. We will not be able to reach these goals alone. Europe alone cannot do that. We need to join forces all over the world, hence the need for the cooperation policies. Let me close by saying once again that President Mattarella yesterday reminded that in spite of the lack of interest on the part of the media, our politicians are negotiating an agreement on the future that will be hopefully approved during the summit on the future to be held in September. The summit was convened by the UN Secretary. Do you know about this summer? Do you know what the stances of the Italian Parliament are? Do you know what the stances of the cultural leaders are? They keep talking about artificial intelligence, they keep talking about a digital transition, they keep talking about energy transition, and about a pact for the protection of the future generations. And this is what Italy, thanks to ASPIS, did a couple of years ago. And for the first time ever, the principles of the Italian constitution were amended, and we said it's enough. We cannot steal the future from the next generations. We need to stop it. Italy will participate in the summit. Of course, changes in the Italian constitution are needed if we want to change the future of the next generations. This is a common responsibility that we need to shoulder in the field of foreign policy, in the field of cooperation. And generally speaking, this is what we should be doing for private investments, public policies, and also to, of course, choose the right path. Unless we choose the right path, there will be no future. I'm very grateful to those of you who are going to take the floor today. This is a historical moment in time for us. Our festival is composed of a variety of events, more than 1,000 all over the country. Books will be published, and together with the national broadcasting company RAI, we developed a podcast that started a few days ago, The Elephant in the Room. This is the title of the podcast, to get rid of stereotypes about Africa. And on the 9th of May, tomorrow, a new program, Voices About the Future, will start. We'll be working on the future of Europe together with Enrico Letta. And before the end of the festival, between the 20th and the 23rd of May, we will be focusing on the UN and multiculturalism. And today we'll be listening to important experts who will tell us whether what we have been talking about, contrary to what President Mattarella stated, is just entertainment, dreams, or it is the only pathway we are left with to guarantee a sustainable future for ourselves and the next generations.
Thank you for this overall picture with this image of 4 different directions. Aside from September, in September we are going to decide what direction to take. Tomorrow, the Festival of Sustainable Development will begin with a conference for civil society, all of us. Now, I'd like to open our discussion with Francesco Corvaro, Special Envoy for Climate on behalf of the government. And I also call on Roberta Rughetti, Deputy Director of AMREF Italia, and Donato Bendicenti, RAI reporter from Brussels. We also have other panelists, but I don't see Mr.
Io ci sono, se mi
Corvaro.
sentite.
Are you there? Yes, I'm here.
Eccomi.
Here are our guests. Marco Rusconi, Director of Cooperation for Italy's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Two colleagues from Nairobi. You can see them, but I would begin with Mr. Corvaro. Climate, as Giovannini said, can really cause profound inequalities. Changing climate creates despair, migration, turmoil, catastrophe in both Northern and Southern Europe. What should we do?
Innanzitutto buon pomeriggio, vi
Good
ringrazio per avermi
afternoon. Thank you
invitato.
for
È una
inviting
bella
me.
domanda, le
Good
rispondo
question.
portando la mia esperienza
I
fondamentalmente.
can
Io ho
only
iniziato
describe
questo
my
lavoro ad agosto dell'anno
experience.
scorso e vengo da un
I
mondo
began this
parallelo a quello
position
politico-diplomatico, perché vengo dal mondo
last year.
accademico, quindi
I
ho
come
studiato
I
i
have an
fenomeni del
academic
cambiamento climatico, sono
background.
uno dei tanti che ha scritto paper sull'argomento.
I wrote
E quindi ho
several papers
affrontato
on
i primi
climate and climate
incontri, Marco
change.
in questo mi ha accompagnato all'inizio della mia vicenda come inviato
Marco
speciale, un po'
assisted
con
me in
curiosità,
my
proprio con la
early
domanda che
days,
mi ha fatto
and I
lei, ma
was
perché siamo
curious when I
arrivati a
attended the
COP29, a
first meetings.
COP28 l'anno
Why
scorso, a
COP
COP30,
28,
con risultati
29,
spesso
30,
modesti, come
and the
mi
results
veniva
are
anticipato
pretty
prima.
modest?
Perché fondamentalmente abbiamo nello scenario che è stato previsto, abbiamo le possibilità e le tecnologie. C'è
It
qualcuno che ha il
is
microfono aperto, non so chi.
possible. Someone has an
Comunque
open
abbiamo
mic. We can hear
le
several
tecnologie
voices
per poter
together.
affrontare il
Anyway,
problema. Perché non lo
technology
stiamo
does allow
affrontando?
to
Da questo
face
punto di
this issue.
vista
Why
è
we're not
balzata ai
doing
miei occhi
anything?
immediata la difficoltà. La
And I
difficoltà è quella
immediately
di creare un
realized
cioè di
that it
affrontare il
is
cambiamento
difficult
climatico per
to
quello che è. Il
address
cambiamento
climate
climatico è
change for
ha un
what it
effetto
is.
globale e solo una risposta
First, it has a
globale
global
può
impact, and only a
effettivamente
global
arginare il
response can limit this problem. I'm sorry, we have an audio problem. We can
Mi
no longer
sentite?
hear
Mi
you.
sentite?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay.
È un problema globale e quindi solo andando ad affrontare in maniera globale questo problema
Only a
possiamo
global
pensare di ottenere
response
dei risultati.
can lead to results. Cooperation. We should work on cooperation. G7 is being held in Italy this year, and this year Italy has emphasized the relationship with Africa for obvious reasons. In my opinion, when the G7 was established in 1975, the world was totally different. Italy and the G7, if they want to remain leaders in this transition, developed countries should begin being a bridge towards the global south. You are a scientist. Very little time is left. The south of the world, climate change, migration due to climate change. What should we do? Time is running out. Migration to Italy is a very small fraction of the overall migration flows. in Africa, they suffer from climate change, and this latter can be turned from a crisis into an opportunity by investing in developing countries. That investment is not money that we take out of ourselves. It is an investment for future generations, in that it will be a flywheel, a catalyst also for Italy, offering youth more opportunities to be part of a sustainable world. The Mattei Plan is an attempt. Italy believes in the Mattei Plan. And so we want to create a relationship between developing and the developed countries, because it's a win-win situation. Either all of us win or all of us lose. Yes, there is no alternative, but let me give the floor to Roberta Rughetti. AMREF, for decades now, has been focusing on cooperation with Africa, with Africans. Cooperation and collaboration. As Professor Giovannini said, time is running out. Africa, I mean, we sold technology to Africa, and they will keep polluting. So again, we need to help them, because the problem began from us, if you like. What are your demands, your requests? Thank you. And thank you, ASVIS, for for engaging us. I agree. Anyone has some experience with African countries. You just land in an airport, take some transportation, and you immediately realize what these obsolete, polluting, contaminating technologies are causing. So it's a travel back in time for us. I have the fortune and the privilege of fully representing AMREF, and I began 20 years ago in April. I studied international cooperation. I tried to figure out what I would do, and I really believe in partnerships. Partnership means that different entities acknowledge each other's role to open up dialogue on an equal ground. International cooperation has rarely done this. Even in terms of language, when we say international cooperation measures, it means different entities transfer of know-how, of skills, and perhaps we exported not only know-how, but bad polluting technologies, or north and south, meaning something, aside from geography. So an organization like ours is important. It was established over 60 years ago. We immediately realized that African resources were the key for success. So I think AMREF represents a successful role model. Cooperation means that both entities are equal. Our aim is to enhance the dignity, importance, and key role of local organizations and entities. This cannot be imposed from the outside, or you lose sight of elements that are fundamental for sustainability. Sustainability is a duty for us, but sustainability is not a single individual concept. Institutional sustainability, the ability to involve local authorities, taking care of initiatives, playing a significant role in time. Social sustainability, not only acceptable initiatives, but being aware of the importance of what you are doing. Communities should be involved from the very beginning. Cultural sustainability, in other words, we should go back to discuss these issues, partnership, localization, based on equality, where the key players are those involved. If possible, I'd like to end on a positive note. Future generations, future and present generations. Today's youth, today's young people are simply younger than we are. So it's not only important to feel responsibility for young people, but we have to listen to them. The success of our projects more often than not comes from young people. They are bold and brave and capable to build their future and involve other youth, other young people. What do we mean by local? Local is what is near, proximity, nearest us, very close to us. We want to involve different communities, the youth, the needs of young people, and the only way to understand their needs is listening to them. So we want to actively involve those who can make a difference, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Just listen, enhance, to change paradigms, laying the foundations of sustainability. Thank you, Roberta. Young people should participate together with other peers. Several African and Asian countries too are willing to self-represent their history, to gain back their own history and culture, the history of slavery, of colonialism. This is a hot topic in Northern Europe. Now, let me introduce Marco Rusconi, Director of Development Cooperation for Italy's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We spent very little for cooperation. What can you do with this little money? What about, it should be indeed 0.70% of GDP, but I mean, there are so many things to do. Whoever wants peace, sustainability, a clean world, it takes money to do this. You have to take this direction, not easy at all. You are now in Rimini, where you have a meeting with farmers from the south of the world. Is this enough? What would you like to do now and in the future? Thank you. Good afternoon. Many thanks to the Expo and ASVIS. I am the director of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, a technical body that monitors and funds projects. The word sustainability is part of our corporate mission. When we were established, our goals were set, including peace and sustainability. As a technician, let's say, as an expert, I see that these goals are far from being reached. Our mandate is to do all we can with the available resources and get partners involved. Resources are scanty or abundant depending on projects. Ironically, there are more resources than projects, more resources than sustainable projects. So first, we should improve the design of projects. Any project should aim at a transformational change. Let me make an example. We build a school in Africa. This is the output, but the real outcome is not to erect walls. We want children going to school. We want to see the number of students rising. The construction of a school building is just the first step. What about the surrounding, the environment, the context? This is simply to say that we go for projects looking at sustainability. Cooperation, our agency, I went back yesterday from a mission in Western Africa. We met with ministers with clear ideas. We visited Senegal, that has just gone through a democratic transition where the opposition was in jail and was democratically elected. African countries can be stable, not just unstable, as many claim. We met with ministers who said, we know what to do, help us exploiting what we are doing, getting the most out of it. I am in Rimini for a meeting with farmers. 13 countries have been involved. The director of our Nairobi office contributed to this result. Farmers, decision makers, policy makers are all attending this meeting. Sustainability also rests upon regulations. We want to introduce sustainability beginning with the countries we cooperate with. Local sustainability is as important. Mine is a very technical agency. We can propose a sustainable farming model. Yes, our agriculture releases less emissions than in France, than French agriculture. Italian agriculture is very advanced in terms of sustainability. We can transfer know-how and technologies in compliance with long-term sustainability and environmental rules, and that's why we may be a model for our partners, especially in Africa. Italy has 5 million SMEs, millions of small farmers. So it's a model possibly more attractive than others. Think of Ethiopia, where 5 million people work in the coffee industry. Those countries look at Italy for sustainable development. Italian history shows that we were able to decentralize development. We have Italian regions that had no water at all until a century ago. Now agriculture is highly sustainable in those regions. So we are a model. Let's say a more sustainable agriculture. But Roberta Rubetti said that just very quickly, because I also have to connect with Claudio Pagliara in New York. So please stay with us. But meanwhile, I give the floor to Roberto Pagliara. Or just give me a short answer. Okay, partnerships, they are essential. Both horizontal partnerships with different subjects, even including in Italy. You can cooperate with civil society, with governmental bodies. We have a vibrant fabric of small organizations and associations and private subjects too. Of course, you should always comply with the Global Compact and the 2030 agenda. Each and everyone can help. Can help subsidiarity. Our agency issued a tender for association and local bodies worth 180 million euros to grant public resources to NGOs and local entities to launch and design projects in Africa with local partners. Okay, thank you very much.
And now over to New York, Claudio Pagliara, foreign correspondent of RAI. Good evening. Claudio, the topic of sustainability. President Mattarella talked at the UN yesterday, and you reported on that. How is this perceived in the United States that is now going through an intense electoral campaign? What about the impact of these topics on the US? Well, Maria, the issue of sustainability is connected with climate change. The candidates running for presidential elections here have completely different opinions and points of view, and not just on this topic. Of course, John Biden and Donald Trump have completely different ideas and opinions. So they have different opinions when it comes to climate and when it comes to the direction that the United States should take. The United States and China are the greatest polluters worldwide. Just to give you an idea, let me share some figures with you. The decision that the US voters are going to take by electing the next US president will certainly have an impact. John Biden took the US back to the climate agreements in Paris. As you know, Trump had decided to step out from those agreements. And during the first part of his mandate, John Biden had the Congress approve, although the name is inappropriate, the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation is almost zero here. It's the greatest investment ever the United States has made on clean energy, renewable energy sources. As for fiscal subsidies and grants, there is more than $370 billion US dollars at stake for a 10-year period. These funds, of course, aim at promoting a transition to renewable energy sources for those consumers who are interested in buying an electric cars rather than a fossil fuel combustion car, and many more measures like this one. The law is already reaping some benefits, and the benefits will become even more visible in the next decade or so. So the results will be visible after the second mandate, if any, of the present president. As you know, one of the slogans of Trump's campaign is drill, drill, drill. So the slogan is clear. Hydrocarbons still play a major role to him, although the world is trying to minimize the use of hydrocarbons, which, as you know, are accountable for the greenhouse effect. Well, Donald Trump is giving green light to hydrocarbons, thus flipping or reverting many of the green policies undertaken by the Biden administration. It is no secret that one of the main issues of the electoral campaigns is the following. According to Donald Trump, Biden's measures prevent the United States from being competitive with the Chinese economy, for example. And Donald Trump would like to get rid of the incentives allocated to those consumers who would like to buy an electric car. And Donald Trump will also try and revert the incentives whereby coal plants, gas plants can be converted into renewable energy plants in the next decade or so. Again, as I said, his slogan is drill, drill, drill. He keeps repeating it at every political rally. So he would give green light to hydrocarbon industry should he be elected president. So the oil companies would keep on drilling. So he talks about gold under our feet, and he means gas and oil, of course. The United States is already self-sufficient from the energy point of view, so they have no specific needs in this field. Of course, this is a geopolitical weapon. We know that having renounced to Russian gas and to Russian oil for Europe has been a major issue and also quite a significant cost. And this is a great opportunity for the United States to replace Russia as a major supplier for Europe. So in a nutshell, Maria, we are talking about two completely different policies when it comes to green transition. Should Biden be re-elected, it would be a significant turning point. Well, as a matter of fact, if Trump won, it would be a significant turning point. Should Biden win, there would be continuity with the existing policies, and maybe even more laws would be passed to speed up the transition towards green economy. And whenever possible, Biden keeps repeating the following, especially when environmental disasters highlighted. So he keeps repeating that climate is a threat. So climate changes endanger the human species. Of course, Donald Trump will never ever state such a sentence. Thank you, Claudio, for outlining this picture very clearly. So the United States is at a juncture. And of course, the situation will change depending on who's going to win the election. We have been talking a lot about cooperation, and now I would like to get connected with the two young activists, Nafiso and Faith.
You've been talking a lot about cooperation, about Africa. At the moment, you are in Nairobi, and as I know, I mean, it's raining like hell. And you've had also more than 100 people who have been killed by this heavy rain. So, I mean, just again to underline that climate change does have an impact in everyday and daily lives. So we are here reasoning about cooperation. Favor, I would like to start from you. You are from Save the Children. What is it that you deem most urgent? Non sento, no, non vediamo. Abbiamo un problema tecnico. Allora, nel frattempo vedo che è inquadrato, credo che sia Giovanni Grandi, titolare della sede della cooperazione italiana.
Giovanni Grandi works in Nairobi for Italian cooperation. Can you hear us? I hope you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. So they're trying to fix some technical problems. They're trying to reestablish the connection with Favor and Nafiso. So I would like to ask you, you are in Nairobi, and this is where cooperation and partnerships have been in place for decades now. In your opinion, what are the most urgent measures to be taken, and how should our attitude and behavior change? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate. Thank you for your invitation. It's a very interesting question. Well, changes have already been implemented, to speak the truth, in the framework of the partnership you were talking about. Rusconi talked about it as well. As far as Kenya is concerned, I would say Kenya is a very nice example. During the visit of the President of the Republic last year, an agreement was signed with the local authorities. It's a Partnership for Sustainable Development Agreement. The title of the agreement signed between Italy and Kenya, so the title itself does contain clear reference to the topics we have been focusing on today. This partnership, this agreement, were developed together with local partners based on a common agenda. The priorities of the local administration were taken into consideration. Could you share some examples with us? Sure. The instrument is based on 3 out of 5 pillars. So it's based on partnership, prosperity, and planet, and also people. So partnership is the binding element, which is also the foundation for all these pillars. All these initiatives rest on these pillars. Together, we finalized some outcomes to be achieved, and also indicators to measure the efficacy of our joint initiatives. Our cooperation activity will be regulated in the framework of this agreement. The Italians committed themselves to supporting this 3-year development plan, thanks to contributions, some of them non-repayable grants. Prosperity is yet another pillar, and initiatives are being undertaken to meet one of the main needs and requirements of Kenya and other African countries, that is to say, unemployment. The need is there to create job opportunities, and this can be done through initiatives aimed at young people, women. Training and education have a major role to play so that income can be generated. As far as the planet pillar is concerned, interventions are being made together with the Kenyan government in order to mitigate or have an impact on the consequences of climate change all of us are aware of. Nairobi being an example with terrible consequences which are affecting the weakest and poorest people. As you know, 50% of the people from Nairobi live. They live in settlements along the rivers, and the rivers flooded, thus generating despair and destruction in the slums of the city. As for the people pillar, access to main fundamental services like education, vocational training, healthcare. Again, these are actions that are being taken in partnership with the local government. This partnership is crucial, but changes in our approach are equally important. We work in collaboration with the local countries, and we don't work for the local countries. As mentioned by one of the previous speakers, during one of his visits to the Western African countries, he met government authorities, and they know exactly what their objectives are. So we need to take advantage of our assets and establish partnerships with the local authorities. There is another equally important partnership that needs to be mentioned here. That is to say, partnerships with entities we are developing initiatives with. Reference was made to the civil society. The civil society has a major role to play in our country. Kenya is maybe the country where we have the highest number of representatives of the civil society compared to other countries where cooperation for development is working. And there are historical reasons behind that. Many religious orders have come to Africa for centuries, and to Kenya in particular. There are more than 40 representatives of associations of the civil society with volunteers working in the country so that they can represent the interests of the Italian civil society in the implementation of these activities. And then there are calls for tenders which are directly handed by the association. We have local tenders which are aimed at generating initiatives depending on the local needs. Well, if you think of the very challenging situation in Africa, Nairobi is a key city for the civil society. Now, I would like to stay in Africa. I would like to reach to Marina Ponti. I think Marina Ponti is connected. Nafiso and Favor are no longer connected with us. Maybe we will successfully reestablish a connection with them. It would have been very nice to listen to those young leaders. So Marina Ponti from Nairobi again. What are we up to? The UN and Guterres has always stated it very clearly. There is great concern. We have already highlighted the main criticalities. Professor Giovannini highlighted them at the very beginning. So as far as you are concerned, what's the major criticality? What's the major concern? The way you see it from Africa, climate change has a significant impact on the poor people, Nairobi, Kenya, and it also has a significant impact, for example, in Brazil. Further south in Mexico, it's not raining at all. Back to you. What about the number one criticality that you would like to tackle? We cannot hear you. I don't know if it's our problem or your problem. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Good afternoon, and many thanks to Osvis for your invitation. Let me answer your question. It's a very important one. In our opinion, and also according to Antonio Gutierrez, the Secretary General reminded it on several occasions, one of the key topics we should be tackling is a renovation in the financial architecture worldwide. The world we live in, in the world we live in, 40% of the world population lives in countries where the governments spend more to finance debt rather than financing education. We keep talking about lack of funds, but every year 480 billion are taken away from the worldwide assets due to capital flows and fiscal evasion. There are flows of money going from the producing countries of natural resources, many of these countries being in Africa. And these cash flows go towards the Western countries. A reform of the financial system going hand in hand with a reform of fiscal taxation that is based on principles of transparency and fairness, and also the bond way. Borrowing and lending countries should all participate in an international forum. And there are also other topics that are connected with resources for development. However, the financial architecture I was talking about is part of the so-called global governance. As the Secretary General reminded us, it was designed 80 years ago in a world that looked completely different. Many of the countries which are now independent and still have colonies, many of the countries which did not participate in the development of this financial architecture are no longer there. So he was wondering, how can a system that was designed for our grandfathers still be used today? How can we use such a system for a peaceful and sustainable future for our grandchildren? This is the number one priority for us. And if I may add one more comment, I would like to quote President Mattarella. He talked about a fairer and more inclusive economic system. Thank you, Marina. Thank you for enhancing the major issue that is redistribution, which goes hand in hand with political responsibility. And talking about politics, I would like to give the floor to Donato Bendicenti, RAI correspondent from Brussels. He was talking about the US electoral campaign that is going to have an impact on the rest of the world, not just the United States. So the future will look different depending on who's going to win the elections. But Europe will vote before the United States. So apart from sustainability and cooperation, to what extent do different countries care about these elections? So we are witnessing the growth of populist movements almost everywhere in Europe. What do you think about this? As they often say during the elections and the European elections in particular, these elections and the outcome of the elections is being debated with major concern. The decision might be taken to go beyond the usual two-party setting. They keep talking about overcoming unanimous results. Of course, in order to get rid of this, the European treaties would have to be revised, and this is something which has been going on for a decade now. Your question is a very interesting one, and your question also focuses on the relations between the 27 member states and the European elections. And let me also comment on what Claudio said. And let me comment on what Europe will have to face depending on who's going to win the US elections, Trump or Biden. If everything goes as expected, on November the 1st, the new Commission will start its activities. Of course, much will depend on the result of the elections. Whoever is going to win the elections so depending on who's going to win the elections, certain decisions will have to be taken. Let me answer your question. The European elections are not a combination of the national elections of the member states. Each and every member state, without now going into the technicalities of the electoral campaigns and their impact on the political forces. So each and every country has its own priorities. And very often these priorities are not connected with the actual agenda of the European Union. If you think about the last Eurobarometer, which summarizes the statistical data at European level, and this report was published in November 2023, the number one priority, the number one concern for Europeans were the war in Ukraine, followed by migrations. The Middle East crisis had already started, and the international scenario already included this major concern. And then number 4 was inflation and the increased cost of living. Now, Is this agenda in line with the priorities of the electoral campaigns of the member states? It is not easy to answer this question. So, sustainability policies have always been an entry ticket for the parties in power. The European Commission is now waiting for the new commission to be appointed. And when Ursula von der Leyen was designated, together with Timmermans, Vice President, also in charge for environmental transition. So the first thing they decided to do at European level, well, over this 5-year period, they have been focusing on sustainability policies. It was not easy to reconcile these policies for sustainability. One might wonder whether Timmermans' commission was too powerful in stating its objections. However, for some areas and sectors in particular, the automotive sector in particular, and greenhouses, well, the European Parliament has taken major actions in this field. Anyway, they successfully transitioned from a set of dreams to clear objectives. Energy and the environment are the two number one priorities. And of course, the European energy industry had to change in the short, medium term because of climate change we're all aware of. In the meantime, multiple crises have occurred. Europe, after recovering from the pandemic, and it was an unprecedented crisis, after recovering from this crisis, Europe was forced to make up for some delays. They had to rush the vaccination campaign. Europe became the drugstore of the world. Vaccines to Africa were provided by the European Union. We can still remember it. When we finally emerged from the crisis, the Russian-Ukrainian war started. We expected economic recovery. The European institutions, Commissioner Gentiloni, had been talking about this economic recovery. Well, eventually, we were faced with the danger of recession. Well, it was not a miracle, but recession was avoided thanks to the effort made by the authorities. And then the Middle East crisis started. Europe is not as involved. Europe is not making its voice heard. But the objectives which characterized the usual paradigm, delta minus 40% emissions by 2030. This is a great idea. I mean, the idea to be emission-free by 2050, although everybody keeps wondering. This has been said again and again. Those who pollute, they have to pay. Europe took step-by-step actions. The results have not always been satisfactory. Eventually, Europe realized that in spite of the political actions, successful political actions undertaken by Europe, initially Putin asked to be paid in rubles for their supplies, and then they decided to discontinue supplies. And in a couple of months, Europe was forced to get in touch with entities that had never been taken into account before. Eventually, they had to resort to their US friends in order to get LPG. So this is the framework we were working in. Let me finish by saying that I don't know whether these topics have ever been debated in the current electoral campaign. I believe that electors, citizens, European citizens have become aware of the importance of these priorities. Time is an asset. Time is a prerequisite, but we're lacking time. Time is running fast. So the way I see it, and this is normal, it has always happened and it's going to happen again and again. Maybe people are finally becoming aware of the importance of sustainability, with specific reference to energy sustainability. There is also another element to be taken into consideration. We don't want the world to become too hot and too soon. I live in Brussels. I traveled to Rome yesterday, and I have to admit it. Dear friends, for a person who doesn't live in Rome, I have to tell you that it's so warm here, but it's much more than that. It's not just a matter of temperature. For sure, there's something more behind it.
Holy crisis or crisis is the title of the next panel. But first, I would like to give the floor to David Munier.
Being with us, thank you. Sorry, I don't know, should I speak English or is Italian okay with you?
Speak English, please.
Yeah, okay, great. So, disability and cooperation, it means to include people. And how important is that, and how far has it not been done? And what are your requests? And what would change if disability would be just an aspect of human life and not something that excludes so many people? Because 80% of the people who have a disability are especially Africa, in Asia, and Latin America, and are far behind. So what can be done, and what should be done, and what are your priorities?
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I just want to say that as CBM we work in partnership towards a barrier-free society where persons with disabilities enjoy their human rights and achieve their full potential. In this context, our greatest priority is to leave no one behind by embracing diversity, inclusion, equity for all. In particular, to act now so that persons with disabilities participate, access opportunities to achieve their full potential, and to contribute towards sustainable development. We are all aware that the World Health Organization estimates about 1.3 billion people, which is 16% of the world population, to have one form of disability. And for Kenyan population is about 8.8 million people, out of whom 240 million are children. And it's also important to note that 1 in every 10 children globally has a form of disability. We are all potential candidates in this journey, as everyone shall experience some limitation in bodily or mental function at some point in life. And given that disability results from interaction between the inaccessible environment and a person who has long-term impairment, it is my hope that the summit for the future has also taken into consideration all accessibility requirements so as not to leave anyone behind. To achieve an inclusive society, we need to break the barriers by making services accessible to everyone, to ensure policies equally benefit all individuals, and communication reach every person. Unfortunately, many people in most societies across the world are still sympathetic, have negative attitudes. They are pitying and patronizing feelings towards persons with disabilities. Accessibility for persons with disabilities is crucial for ensuring equal opportunities and participation in society. This includes, but is not limited to, physical accessibility in buildings and public spaces, as well as digital accessibility for websites, softwares, and technology. Meaningful participation by persons with disabilities refers to their active involvement and engagement in all aspects of society on equal basis with others. It encompasses various aspects such as education, employment, politics, social activities, and community life. We make the invisible population more visible by ensuring they are from the farthest end to the front. And I'm sure this is our duty to ensure that no one is left behind. And just reflecting on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was done in 2007, it describes disability as an evolving concept and states that persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which, when interaction with the various barriers within the environment, it hinders the effective participation in society on equal basis with others. Despite the direct link between the TRPD 2007 and the 2030 SDGs, we can no longer ignore that needs to change, and we are also looking to the future by addressing the greater unmet needs and barriers facing persons with disabilities. Unfortunately, many countries have passed legislation or laws to prohibit discrimination against persons with disabilities, but there's little evidence that these laws have improved their quality of life. In contrast, there's evidence that adaptations of the workplace to accommodate persons with disabilities can improve employment and productivity, while at the same time accessing assistive technologies like devices for even vision, even hearing, even walking devices, or even hearing, improves functionality of various domains. I just want to say that also for transport, urban planning, digital platforms, and access to buildings for persons with disabilities has to be prioritized. And the most important for it is to embrace universal design principles that ensure that products, environments, programs, and services are usable by everyone without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So my clarion call is to ensure that we have an inclusive and accessible future where one person shall share one planet, enjoying shared peace and prosperity through one partnership framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Munyeni, because you reminded us that inclusivity is not only a must by the UN Charter, but it's profitable if all the society moves forward together, but everybody has to be given a chance. Thank you so much for being with us. Grazie a David.
Thank you, David Munyendo. The first panel ends here, but we move on to the next one, as announced by Donato. Holy crisis or multiple crises. Many thanks to our panelists and guests. Natalie Tocci, Director of the Institute for International Affairs, has joined us. We're waiting for Silvia Stilli. Ahudelo da Borda is remotely connected. Loretta Malpezzoni, activist of Generazione e Cooperazione. Arthur Muliro, Deputy Manager Director of Society for International Development, and the Deputy President of the Chamber of Deputies committee is about to join us. Natalie will begin. Polycrisis. A crisis is in itself complicated, and now we speak of poly or multiple crises. Speaking of sustainable development, it's easy to realize that we are going through an emergency with very little time left. And we only spend 1/3 of what we are supposed to spend for cooperation. So, how to get out of this poly crisis towards climate change, elections, both here and in the States? What do you think? What is a polycrisis? A polycrisis is caused by the way we used to live, and the world has been changing. We used to live in a world where development cooperation was established and developed. It was an open world. It wasn't open everywhere, but let's say in the post-war period and later, during the Cold War period, and later, we used to live in a world with specific features. Integration and interdependence were considered in a good way. Soft prevailed over hardware. Change processes looked linear. Things didn't happen in the same way at the same time, but take democratization processes. People never went back once the process had begun. There was no political conditionality mechanism within the framework of the European Union. And so once you reached the promised land, you didn't go back. So processes were linear. Conflicts. We believed that after violence, interposition, peacekeeping, conflict management, agreement could be signed, different forms of transitional justice and so forth, reach the promised land. So change processes were linear. People believed that the economy prevailed over politics. Business is business, people said. So economic considerations won. Now, those things, those assumptions in the last 20 years didn't work exactly that way. So in this open world, the first closure came with 9/11, the war against terrorism. Then the economic crisis and the recession. Globalization was questioned for the first time, and also interdependence. All of a sudden, we realized interdependence also brought about inequalities. The crisis of democracy, Brexit, Donald Trump elections, populism, migration. Migration is not a crisis. It is a political crisis because it is part of the crisis of liberal democracy. And then the pandemic that questioned globalization. Globalization was seen as a source of insecurity. And then Ukraine, the Middle East conflicts, Asia-Pacific conflicts, all this means that we live in a world where opening and closure coexist. So our policies need to take this into account. We live in a world that is half open, half closed. We realize that opening can also mean insecurity. So you have to strike a balance between defense and the soft signs of foreign policy, like diplomacy and cooperation. Not so much in Europe, where we lagged behind when it comes to defense issues. Globally speaking, on average, last year, the average spending for defense was 3.2%. We now spend 1.7%, but that is the trajectory. So the pie size is the same, but the piece of the pie for cooperation gets smaller. It is well known that competition is everywhere. We no longer live in a unipolar world where only the West rules. You are an observer of global crisis and changes. So, in the past, we had two superpowers. They no longer exist. We are seeing a rebalancing. This is a transition period, very dangerous, by the way, because the US is a power that nobody takes seriously. An American president tells the Israeli prime minister to do something and the Israeli minister disobeys, doesn't do that. Never seen before, unprecedented. Europe is investing in Africa, and for the first time ever, we are no longer dictating things to others. We want a partnership. And so we can choose to cooperate with China, with Russia, with Italy. That's what African countries tell us. Discussion topic is hard versus soft, but your point is more profound. It is not related to how much, but how you do things. La última galleta en la caja. This is what my Spanish husband tells me. This was less true in Italy, but in Anglo-Saxon countries, they generally told countries, this is the money I'm going to give you, but you have to do this and that. So the culture of development cooperation is based on conditionality. We now live in a different world where there is competition, where conditionality sometimes doesn't exist. Balance of forces are changing. There is a French journalist who interviewed the president of Congo. He was very blunt and said, we like cooperating with Russia and China. They don't impose anything upon us, okay? It's a widespread sentiment. Yes, absolutely. It's like, you know, an opportunity to rethink the way we do things. What is the pitfall? The way the awareness, desire and drive with partnerships, equal grounds and whatever. What are we doing this? We are turning this into a cynical transaction, which has nothing to do with partnerships. It is a transaction, the denial of foreign policy, and the same goes for development cooperation. It's a public meeting, this one, so I think I can be honest. At my institute 2 weeks ago, we received the James Cleverly, Home Office Secretary, to talk about Rwanda. And, you know, at some point, during our public conversation, he said something that possibly we could have heard here too. He was speaking of the importance of non-predatory relationships based on equal opportunities and so on and so forth. And he said, the old approach of development cooperation was wrong, conditionality, I give you, but in return for that, you have to do this and that. What's wrong with that? I give you money, my money, I offer a service to you, controlling migrants, so it's based on the same grounds. So this is the denial of foreign policy, interacting with a second country, like, you know, two CEOs entering into an agreement. It's not exactly the same thing. So this is the main point I'd like to stress. Beware of what lies behind nice words, equality, partnerships, and so forth. Indeed, we don't want transactions where rights, rules, principles are denied. Not at all. So beware of this tricky point. This is true for Italy, for Europe, and it would be the worst lesson to learn from the just revisiting of today's world, because the world has changed, but this is very wrong, I think.
I don't know whether we have more people connected with us, because I would like to listen to your point of view. I think we have Airo Agudelo Dagor, who is connected from Barranquilla. Is it you? I was told, please switch on your microphones. It's on, it's on. I hope you can hear me very well. We can hear you and we can see you. I don't know whether you could follow Natalie Tocci's presentation. It was just perfect, perfect. Now, I would like to know your opinion. What about this moment in time? According to Natalie, the risk is to transform political diplomatic relations into a transaction, into a deal. First of all, good morning from here. It's afternoon for you. Let me formally introduce you, Cairo Agruelo da Porta, Professor of International Relations at the North Barranquilla University, Colombia. Right, correct. That's me. That's me. That's me. What you said is perfectly true, and I perfectly agree with what Mrs. Tocci just said. And I have been following the previous panel very carefully too, and I perfectly agree with their diagnosis and also with this potential recipe or treatment. Now, if I may reply to you, I don't know, do you want me to reply to your question or do you want me to give my formal presentation? So shall I first answer the question and then give my presentation, or what? Well, answer the question, and then of course I will ask about your point of view, which is based on your context. So what are the criticalities for cooperation? If you want to reply to Natalie's statement, please do. Do you agree with her interpretation? There are several questions to be asked, and they generate anxiety. I fully agree with the diagnosis. And I will also try and share my point of view. I was asked to comment on the diagnosis made by Natalie Tocci and the previous speakers. So I will be sharing the point of view of a person living in Latin America. So I will be talking about polycrises as they are seen from Latin America. I'm close to the Caribbeans, and doing this exercise from here, from Colombia, what does it mean? What does it imply for us today? Again, let me reiterate it. I perfectly agree with the picture you have been giving so far. And I also agree with some potential recipes. Well, then, let's focus on the polycrisis as you see them from Colombia, as you see them from the Caribbean. Which polycrisis can you see from there? Of course, I'm sure you will focus on Haiti and then you will move north, maybe. Let me share a couple of comments in my capacity as a school teacher, university professor. And this takes me back to what Nathalie was talking about. That is, maybe we didn't take ourselves too seriously. We had embarked upon a journey worldwide, as mentioned by Mrs. Tocci. After the tragedies of last century, what do I mean? International cooperation for development as a diplomatic system started in the framework of multilateralism after 1945. Of course, this may sound trivial, but from time to time, it's important to remind people of that. So we're here to talk about the Summit on the Future, International Cooperation, Multilateralism, and Civil Society. The system, as described by our colleague, did not follow a linear path as expected, hence its crisis. This is the reason why it's an international systemic crisis. And I might even say that either we take it seriously, either the 2030 agenda as the outcome takes it into account. So what you mean, you are encouraging politicians to take this very seriously. The 16th and the 17th Sustainable Development Goal must be taken very, very seriously. Without number 17, there will be no 16. Without goal 16, there will be no one of the previous 15 goals. So cooperation is the key factor, and in the Agenda 2030, it is named Alliance for Sustainable Growth and Development. Well, of course, I cannot remember them all by heart. And then we have peace and justice and the democratic institutions. As we see it from Latin America, the 16th goal is the core element of the 2030 agenda. I'm sure this is nothing new. Latin America is the richest area when it comes to natural resources, although these natural resources were stolen by others. And I will go into the details of this topic in a moment. What do I mean? The structural causes for underdevelopment in Latin America, the structural causes for lack of sustainability are not to be found in economic reasons. The structural causes are purely political in nature. And I will repeat it. They are purely political in nature because this continent is extremely rich in natural resources. For other areas, the structural causes for natural development are to be found in the economy. But when it comes to Latin America, this is not the case. For Latin America, the causes are to be found in the political system. So it's a political issue. It's a problem that relates to the 16th goal. Hence, all the crises that fall within this polycrisis. I agree with Natalie. We can call it a systemic crisis. And this systemic crisis is composed of multiple individual crises. What about the solution to this crisis? Let me state it very quickly, because I know we have very little time left. When the New World System was set up, the new system, when the new system was created, some new dangers like wars emerged. When wars became world wars, there had always been wars in the past, but they were not world wars. So what you mean is that this system, unfortunately, is the consequence of a devastating war. That's correct. And hopefully we won't need a new one, right? But that's how we are. We are reactive rather than proactive. We realize that a change, a system, a transition are needed only when we realize that evils have become international. I prefer to say that they are international rather than global. We have come to realize that there is a global evil, and I'm talking about climate change. It took us quite some time to realize that, but finally we understood it. So the diagnosis was made and a solution needs to be found. And in the framework of this diagnosis, we are hope carriers of hope. And what is the only hope we're left with? We have to take seriously the cosmopolitan role we had acquired. And having a cosmopolitan role is not utopia. Historians, Greek historians, maintained that there was no separation between polis and cosmopolis. And the Romans thought exactly the same. There was no division between urbe and orbis. And this is the connection we are now missing. You are shooting to the stars. So please stay connected with us. I would like to invite here on stage the Vice President of the Foreign Commission, of the Parliamentary Commission for Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Quartapelle, and Andrea Stocchiero. Silvia Stili from 070 campaign could not attend, so you're here on her behalf. We have been mentioning politics quite frequently. So since Lia Quartarella is the only politician here, let me ask you, so politicians have been blamed by almost all the speakers. So this lack of time, this time deficiency is due to politics, and it's up to the politicians to decide in Europe, in the US, in Africa, in Asia. So politics has a major role to play. Now, what do you think? What do you think about cooperation? What about sustainable development? What are we up to? And how do you view the priorities and criticalities? Do you think politics can be of help here? Thank you for your invitation, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about these topics. I think I got invited, especially in my capacity as a vice president of the Parliamentary Commission. Now, there are some blames to be recognized here, and they are connected with the agenda. I think that as far as Italy is concerned, the Agenda 2030 goals were not fully incorporated. I think that setting long-term goals is different from what we normally do in politics. We are 6 years away from the implementation, the full implementation of the agenda. Yes, for politics, 6 years is quite a lot. Yes, but still, we were supposed to, and we will have to accept this point of view, that is to say, setting goals, setting objectives. And then we may talk about how to achieve them, but having a more sustainable, fairer, more equal Italy goes well beyond the political parties. I think this is crucial. Different perception of time in politics, science, and society. Andrea, I would like to involve you as well. So 070 generation. Apologies, I'm coughing a lot. I need some water. One of the main problems is that Italy allocates little funds to cooperation. So 0.27 according to the OECD data. And some of these funds come back to Italy because they're allocated to migrants, and this is not cooperation. And you organized a campaign to increase this number to 0.70. That's correct. This takes me back to a topic that was also mentioned by one of the previous speakers and by Professor Giovannini. The NGOs are promoting the 070 campaign. The goal number 17 of the 2030 agenda states that countries allocate 0.7% of the GDP to support public development. This objective was set back in the 70s, so we have been reiterating it for more than 50 years. Some countries did achieve it, especially Northern European countries, like-minded countries like Sweden, Norway, but also the UK and France. As far as Italy is concerned, Italy has never ever reached this goal for a variety of reasons. Now, the importance of cooperation is so clear, considering the poly-crisis we are experiencing, that the investment on cooperation, as stated by President Mattarella, is key. It is crucial for us, but also for the African people we collaborate with, and so on and so forth. This is a very important issue. Of course, we cannot take it for granted. We know it very well. resources for cooperation have to go hand in hand with a new form of cooperation. Polycrisis in a different world, or because of polycrisis in a different world, old-style cooperation has to be renovated. I very much appreciated what Natalie Tocci said about the risk of viewing partnerships as deals, transactions. And of course, foreign policies are key here. We know that cooperation is an integral part of foreign policies. This is why cooperation cannot be downplayed to a deal or transaction. This is nothing new for the NGOs. We have been aware of the partnership problems for 50 years. When the open model still existed, cooperation was exploited for political and economic reasons. So the NGOs have been demanding, they have been requesting more resources for cooperation. My university professor, he used to tell me, although you write your dissertation thesis, eventually you have to take side with someone, you have to stand for democracy. And this is extremely clear. So think about farmers' movements in Africa, or movements of the local people, indigenous people in Latin America. They have been recognized by COP28. They protect 80% of biodiversity worldwide. The 6th mass extinction of biodiversity is about to happen, according to the scientists, and taking side with the indigenous people means supporting their rights in the Amazon, in Congo, Indonesia. And from this point of view, it means taking a political side when it comes to the political debate. We have to provide our support, being aware of the fact that we will be experiencing exactly the same problems. Protecting biodiversity in Italy and Europe is key, and conflicts, frictions are involving a variety of economic players. They, of course, are arguing about soil exploitation. And then quality of cooperation. As already explained, talking about cooperation also means talking about income. Talking about cooperation means talking about fiscal and economic architecture. We would like, or let me rephrase it, in the G20, they proposed taxation on very rich people. The same should also be done by the G7 countries. Thanks to these taxes, thanks to this taxation, funds would support educational, healthcare policies, especially in the southern part of the world. Last but not least, and this is maybe less well known, in Italy, we are ahead of the other member states, and we're also ahead of other countries worldwide, because I don't know whether you know it or not. Last year, the government implemented the new Sustainable Development Strategy. Thanks to this new strategy, we now have the policy consistency plan in force. If the policies were truly consistent, starting from the principles all the way to the commercial and investment policies, farming policies, cooperation policies, in spite of complexity, and the National Statistical Institute in Italy is working on the consistency of the policies. So if the plan were implemented, we would make a significant leap forward in Italy, especially if the government and parliament became aware of these topics. I have a question for Mrs. Quartapelle. Are these topics ever discussed by the Parliamentary Commission for Foreign Affairs? Is anything changing within the Commission? Andrea mentioned some key political issues. Is there an ongoing discussion within the Commission? Formally speaking, we have all the tools we need to take action. We have a plan in place. We have a 3-year plan for cooperation in place. And there are also provisions in place whereby parliamentary discussions should occur. But then very often these things do not turn into real practices or measures. And this is the case for the present government, but also the previous ones. Yes, very often cooperation has been underestimated. Well, I disagree. There have been moments in time when they decided to no longer invest on cooperation. On other occasions, more funds were allocated. Monti's government decided to invest on cooperation once again. A ministry for cooperation existed back then, and more resources were allocated in this field. Of course, when you have a right-wing party in power, this is more difficult. What worries me the most at this moment in time is the combination of the Mattei plan and lack of allocation now, there has been an increase in the priority countries in Africa, 13 to 21. Nonetheless, investments on migration were drastically reduced. How can you reconcile these two things? Funds are needed, and I think that this is a real issue. This is a priority. Last year, which was supposed to be the first year when we got ready for the Mattei plan, last year, resources for cooperation were drastically reduced, and this bears witness to the fact that there is no such commitment. This year, we're asking to view the Mattei plan sheets. We would like to discuss the goals country by country. We would like to discuss the 3-year plan on cooperation, but we have been given no feedback from the government. And this is why we believe that this is one of the main Italian weaknesses, that is, strategies are approved, but then they're not implemented. And of course, this goes to the detriment of the image of our country. The Mattei plan should not be evaluated according to the number of heads of state and government who came to Rome in January. The value of the plan will have to be evaluated in 3 years from now, when we'll finally realize whether Italy was consistent with its commitments. Unless this approach is adopted, unless steps are followed in Italy and in our foreign relations, no actions will be developed and implemented, to the detriment of our well-being. We will be forced to take action according to the decisions that have been taken by others. I don't know whether we have Arthur Molino connected with us.
And I wanted to ask you, you've been following the debate here. I mean, we have here on the floor, we have got a politician, we have got Natalie Tocci. She is from a think tank, probably one of the most important ones here in Italy, and Andrea from campaign manager and activist. So what would you, from your point of view, how cooperation, what should it mean and what should it include, and what are the difficulties at the moment that you can see from your point of view?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation and also for the question. What should cooperation mean? I think, first of all, cooperation is fundamentally an exchange of values. It is a demonstration by one or more countries that are suggesting that these are things that are important to us and we would like to share them with you. So I think a lot when we engage in the debate about cooperation, we seem to skip or to ignore or to downplay the importance of the values aspect of the engagement. As other people have said, it becomes more or less a tactical game of whether it's a transaction exchange or a question to boost local political advantage for one group or another. And I think when these things happen, it weakens the moral basis and foundation of the cooperation process per se.
So the moral values are the most important. I wanted to know from another person, she's also connected, Loretta Maffezzoni. She's a young activist of Generation Cooperation. I don't see her anymore. From Nairobi, she should be connected here. Loretta, tu che cosa ne pensi? Perché Arthur dice...
What do you think? Arthur said, we would like to share values. So they're interested in partnership. And what is your request? And you represent the younger generation. And where are criticalities, in your opinion? I agree. And good morning, by the way. Good morning. I agree. I hope you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. I agree with the idea of having a partnership in place, provided that this partnership does not become something which is just cross-sectional. I mean, we don't want it to be an economic transaction. We don't want it to be a deal. It must guarantee equality, self-awareness, accountability, and of course, the responsibilities must be clear. So we should know that there are some countries that are lagging behind. And even more important, we need to talk about inequality at national level, especially in Africa, but also in Europe. It is more and more the case. So there are more and more people getting richer and richer, and poor people become even poorer. And there is no cooperation for development here. Cooperation for development could support peace and favor the redistribution of wealth in a fair way. So you think that cooperation might favor redistribution, and cooperation might also guarantee more equity. So, as mentioned by our colleague from Barranquilla in Colombia, how much is still missing from cooperation? You mentioned something that is often debated in the northern countries, that is, European countries, the guilty countries, the countries that are accountable for slavery. So there should be a mutual cultural recognition to have a brand new approach. It is only by recognizing the responsibilities of the past that can we make progress. We are aware of the existing conflicts, and there are some other conflicts we know nothing about, and this is important. So this has always been the case, and the civil society should be held accountable as well. Let me give you an example. Think about the climate crisis. We should be using the term climate crisis rather than climate change. We got used to climate change. Climate change sounds reassuring, while if we talk about climate crisis, this will have an impact on the people, and people will start thinking about it. If it's raining so much, if it's raining so heavily, and then it's so sunny, and there is dryness and drought, and if there is ice melting, there must be a crisis going on. So, and I believe that far too often we use the wrong terminology. So we sugar the pill simply because we want that people can sleep soundly. I think we should be using the right terminology. Think about Palestine. We should be using the term genocide. We cannot talk about a war. It's a genocide. Things have to be clearly acknowledged. The reality must be acknowledged so that appropriate actions can be taken. Unless we speak clearly, because we pretending nothing is happening. Loretta is stating it very clearly. Things should be expressed differently. What about the challenges for politics in Europe, old style politics? This is connected with the events of the past few days. Think about demonstrations in the universities in Europe, in the United States, and also think about demonstrations elsewhere. They involve the young generation. We need to acknowledge that the situation, so it is what it is, because the old generation made some mistakes, and we all agree on that. The disaster we are experiencing in the Middle East and in Europe was created by somebody else, by the old generation. It is a fact. Which doesn't mean that the young generation has easy answers, but it's just that the old generation should be posing questions. Think about the Middle East. Of course, it's a very challenging and complex scenario, but think about it. A certain strategy has been implemented so far. It has not been very successful. Maria, you mentioned something I disagree with. You were talking about the United States, and you highlighted the decreasing power of the United States. And you said Israel is no longer listening to the United States. That's only partially true. In the past, the Republicans, for example, Reagan administration in 1981, and then in 1991, George Bush, and eventually in 2006, George Bush son. So all three administrations decided to stop what Israel had been doing. This week, past few days, they have taken actions, but it's just lip service. No stick is being used here, which doesn't mean, or rather, let me rephrase it. I'm not talking about anti-Jewish movements, etc. What they're asking for in the US universities, they are asking to reduce or remove investments. And this takes me back to what I was talking about a moment ago. The take-home message here is Since there is not much we can do, since we cannot have a significant impact, why don't we reduce everything to a mere deal, a mere transaction? Of course, this policy can be criticized for a variety of reasons, but we cannot throw the baby with the bath. We don't want this prophecy to come true.
This is quite new for politics. It is quite bothering, especially in Africa, where many presidents and heads of state want to have an equal ground dialogue with us. To what extent are we prepared to fully overlook certain values? We're setting the bar because, you know, you may need something even from Russia, and they give that to me. I kind of disagree with Natalie. This is a difficult time because the West is no longer capable to have an impact as before. And this is not part of our decision-making process yet. We still believe we can condition, influence others. We are failing with Hungary, let alone more difficult countries and situations. Israel is a case in point, but there are many more outside the West and Western borders. We are not fully aware of this. In my view, there should be a solution. We invaded Afghanistan because we wanted to export democracy, but 20 years have elapsed and we have realized that it was wrong. The vice president decided to withdraw the troops. "20 years down the line, we abandon people who still today tell us, like, you know, parliamentarians, we are not capable of having them here with us. And there must exist a solution. I think it's all about the quality of democracy. Take Ukraine, Georgia, they all call for help. The Balkans, Tunisia. So perhaps we should be a bit more aware and self-critical and more brave and more courageous. We will never, I doubt we can ever influence Eritrea, for instance, but those close to us, the individuals who want to be close to us, we can't pretend they don't exist. I take Eritrea as a case in point because it's a country where the Mattei plan is reopening relations with this country, which is known as the North Korea of Africa. No constitution, no parliament. We don't know how many prisoners, political prisoners, have been lost. So we are the first to reopen, to restart relations with Eritrea. So I think there should be a solution, like being aware of what we can do and being brave to leave our comfort zone. Sometimes we can do much with few resources. Italy has to downsize its expectations. Turkey, the African Horn, we haven't seen more wealth or well-being in those areas. So we are about to end our meeting. Let me hear with
a closing idea or whatever. I mean, not too long, since we don't have a lot of time. So what would you say, wanting to sum up your point of view?
Grazie molte. Direi che è importante.
Africa is changing, as many have explained. The demographics of Africa has changed, different requests from people. Italy should, I think, make a quality leap with cooperation. We want to have a relationship which is based on respect, including the views of Africans. I think we can help Italy improve cooperation if there is a true dialogue between us. So what do we want? What can you do with us? And finally, I think that Italy is also changing, meaning that we have second and third generations of Italians. We should ask those people to help us develop a new and different idea of cooperation between Italy and African countries. Second and third generations, people who live there, as an additional resource to add quality to our efforts. Thank you for naming second and third generations, an essential topic that has to do with domestic democracy. Loretta Maffezzoni is an activist. What do you think? Your comments have raised a lot of reactions. Well, first of all, I don't like the term second or third generation, but anyway, I would rather say something different. It's a long way, there is a long way to go, but anyway, I think we should make these people we should turn them into active participants. I attended several conferences where the diaspora existing in Italy was rarely considered. And this is a risky business. We don't want to repeat the same mistakes. Time is running out. We're all connected. If something goes wrong in a region, it's gonna go wrong elsewhere too. So the civil society should always be involved. As to the 2030 agenda, we should select goals and objectives. So stop speaking and chatting, act now. Act now, because change is happening. The climate crisis can really wreak havoc for us. UN goals, yes, you're right, we can't implement all of them. And Professor said that SDG 16, peace and justice, is possibly the most important one. Yes, let me thank you. I took the liberty to mention Adam and Eve and the notion of cosmopolis. We have realized that this is a tragic global evil. I'm speaking of the climate change. So we have to use public global goods, beginning with global policies. And the Global Development Plan, the 2030 Agenda, the way I call it, and in Latin America, SDG 16 is most important. We should take this seriously. Let me make two examples. In 2010, the EU was negotiating a free trade agreement with the Andean community. 4 countries, Colombia and Peru, had no government, whereas Ecuador and Bolivia didn't have one. I don't remember exactly anyway. 2 projects, 2 draft agreements were submitted. The 2 progressive governments were set on 2 covenants, the environmentalist and ethnic covenant to protect indigenous people, and the dignified labor covenant. In the Colombian Peru proposal, those 2 covenants didn't exist. What did the European Union choose to ratify the free trade agreement? For the sake of consistency, the Union should have chosen Bolivia and Ecuador proposal. Not at all. It chose the Colombia-Peru option. So we have an agreement in place that is totally against the quality of labor and the environment. And so, as Loretta said, what are we talking about? The most important player is the European Union when it comes to cooperation. Second example, in 2012, Korea and Ecuador discovered a huge oil field in an indigenous reserve. And they said, I am willing to give up the exploitation of this oil field, 920 million barrels of oil, producing millions and millions of tons of CO2. They said, we are willing to give up if you give us millions of dollars in 15 years to protect this global asset. They only received $16 million. That's what they said. It's a crisis. We are poor. We can't make it. And the project is dead. Another example. Today, progressive governments in Latin America, very few of them, led, take Colombia. The president of Colombia said the UN Assembly said at the UN Assembly last year, we no longer want this cooperation. In Latin America, we have all you need in the rest of the world for these two urgent, compelling transitions, the ecological and technology transition. We in Latin America, in South America, have lithium, plutonium, cobalt. Electric cars do need batteries, lithium, and so forth. Not only to decarbonize, of course, we also need fossil fuels. We will still need them because this is a transition period, of course. And most importantly, we have oxygen. The Amazon forest, 30% of sweet water in the world comes from South America. But please don't waste water. We can be custodians of this global public asset. If we think in terms of cosmopolis and not only polis, but give us more money, more funds. And you will reply, we are in crisis. Andrea Stocchiero will remember a proposal dating back to the 80s. Let's exchange foreign debt for ecology. We become custodians of this global public asset in the soil and under, but do cancel our foreign debt. Professor, thank you. The floor goes to Andrea again. Andrea, this is a proposal for cooperation. That is to say, considering the foreign debt of those countries, of course. This is about the financial architecture. Flight of capitals. Last year, we gave $211 billion, donor countries. In the same year, in Africa, $200 billion fled the countries. Offshore tax havens, you know. You have to consider several factors. I appreciated this debate. Conditionality. 2 weeks ago, I was in Ethiopia. Even China requests conditionalities. They don't give money for free. But the European Union, Global Gateway, cooperation, partnerships on equal grounds, and so on and so forth. But the US says the same thing. So at the end of the day, there is no such a difference. The transactional approach or neo-colonial approach end in the same way, and Africans and Latin Americans are well aware of this, so we need a different, less hypocritical dialogue. Second, we always talk about states, but there are also subjects who are not states, including civil society. Civil society doesn't believe we are being stuck into this geopolitical discussion. As Arthur and Loretta stated, in Africa too, there exist political, social movements who share the same opinions. Or we share their opinions. It's a blending world. Third, I like the word responsibility or liability. Common but different responsibilities. Speaking of climate, well, in spite of the crisis of multilateralism, COP28 approved the Fund for Loss and Damages, which is not a tiny thing, in that it acknowledges the principle that I emitted more CO2, I'm causing losses and damage, and I pay for that. Our Prime Minister gave 100 million euros, like the Arab Emirates and France. Then we will see how the money will be spent. Finally, on the 14th and 15th of May, next week, at FAO, there will be the CD7 civil society organizations from G7 and other countries will meet. The G7 should be part of multilateralism, pushing on multilateralism. In those 2 days, we will discuss these issues. Don't miss this opportunity. Thank you. Natalie, new conditionalities to amend and change. Are things really changing? Wars, elections, will they cause, a step back? Let me stress what you said earlier. Being aware that the world has changed is fine. So, influencing others in different ways. Conditionality can also be seen as something that is used to force others to do things. But anyway, it is an opportunity to have more respectful, listening relationships. But again, how are we interpreting this awareness? To date, it's turning into throwing everything away, pretending that we are establishing more equality-based relations. With whom? With the government? What about these conditionalities? Were they part of the colonial or neo-colonial world? Or were they part of dialogue with the local societies and communities? There was something good back then. So, although the world has changed, we can't simply throw everything away. It's not to companies, to CEOs of such companies. This is about heads of state and government. They can't do business to the detriment of society. Migrants on one side, energy security. This is not foreign policy. This is not cooperation, nothing to do with them. Loretta's words are very right. Let's call everything with their true name. Thank you, Natalie. Leah. Very difficult to put this into practice for politics. It amounts to fully considering civil society. Politics considers, contingent situations. Do you think that we should not throw everything away, as Natalie said? Right now, in Italy, at European level, it's very different. In other European countries, it's very different. But right now, in Italy, we are experiencing nostalgia. The Matteo plan comes from nostalgia, starting with its name. Enrico Mattei has been a great Italian, but Italy in 2024 is very different from the 50s. The world has changed. But if you launch this plan looking behind, you're going to fail. So I see this tendency towards nostalgia. Politics, on the other hand, should realize that ordinary people are confused. You have an insight that the future is obscure and unknown. So politics, I don't talk about the political parties, but politics at large should engage citizens. These are challenges. Why the 2030 agenda is not so important for politics. Surveys and polls were conducted on this. Are people in favor of development cooperation? Well, in most cases, people say yes to cooperation, but then this loses weight for policymakers. Why? Because the meaning of this choice has never been clearly explained. We have no constituencies, no traditional economic categories. Public opinion believes in long-term goals, but has never been, but nobody has ever explained what happens if you don't achieve those goals. So the world is tougher, more complicated, so we should be more sincere and honest when speaking with the public opinion. Otherwise, you can pay a very expensive bill. Okay, you should also avoid an endless wish list, because if you're spending 0.30, you can spend 3 times as much overnight, but more transparency, honesty with the public opinion is key, I think, to explain why choices are made. Cooperation is economically beneficial for Italy. Okay, I thank you very much. Special thanks to ASVIS for the Festival of Sustainable Development. Again, Mattarella mentioned this yesterday. The President of the Republic stressed heavily that economic, fair, inclusive development is a good choice. So thank you very much. Tomorrow there will be another initiative on sustainable finance at the Salone del Libro. The podcast organized with RAI, The Elephant in the Room. The Elephant is Africa. Radio Radicale is also creating a podcast to communicate. This continent is very diverse and we don't know it, but we should. Okay, thank you very much for staying with us until this late time. Thank you.